Hey, what's up? This is Scott from Syntax, and in this local first from scratch video, we're going to be talking about Replicache. Now, Replicache is an extremely powerful library that handles patching and syncing data, and the cool thing about Replicache is you can use it just offline and local, or you can use it to sync to a server somewhere else. And this process is difficult, but it's really great because you get full control over how this sync happens, what happens on the server. You know, a lot of these platforms that are trying to make local first easier want to own everything. They want to own your database, they want to own the client side. But what Replicache does is it allows you to work with the client side data, and then when that sync happens on the server, you get to choose how the server responds to those changes. Meaning that you can bring this to an already existing project. Now, it's not that simple. We'll be talking quite a bit about that as we go. And in this first video, we're going to be showing you how to get Replicache set up and working. Now, let's take a quick look at what we're going to be building. This is a basic to-do list. Get food. Nice. This is a basic to-do list. You can see that as we add things, they get added here. If I refresh the page, these are all still here. And if we take a look at our application tab and down here in the Replicache database, you know, in the last video, what we were doing was storing our data in a structure that was really mimicking what we would want the external database structure to be, as in the data was being saved into the database in the exact structure that we were using it, and then we were just reading it from the database. But Replicache isn't that simple. In fact, if we look at the data inside of here, inside of our chunks, it is really not that simple. In fact, we open this thing up, we can see what look to be just individual messages about the status of our data. And this allows the application to know what's changed, when it changed, how it changed, and this gives you the strength to be able to version things in a way where, oh, if the server is more up to date than the client, then we pick the server. If the client is more up to date than the server, then we push up to the client. So we are getting out of the phase of just working with our raw data and getting more into augmented data that carries more information as a patch message. And in fact, you can even see if we open up this one, there has an array. Inside of this array is 3 items. You can see that the key for this is a key for this to do. The ID is the ID that was created when the to-do was created, and you can see that this is our hello to-do right here. Now, because this is such a difficult process, we're going to be taking just this first video to get Replicache set up. I'm going to be doing it in a SvelteKit application. You can use any framework library of your choice. This code is agnostic to the framework. Now, when we do hit Svelte specific things, just like in the last video, I'll show you what you have to do to make it work in other places, but it's largely the same concept overall. And if you're familiar with your front-end framework, you're going to have no problems anyways. So let's get started building this to-do app with Replicache, where we can dive into the world of a bit more advanced local first techniques. So let's get started by installing SvelteKit here. Again, you can use any framework. You can even toss it into a code base you already have. We can do npm create svelte, and we'll just call this not local checklist because I've already used that name. We'll call this checklist rep for Replicache, right? Okay, checklist rep. We're going to select a skeleton project, it's bare bones. We're going to say yes to TypeScript, ESLint prettier, and we're going to try Svelte 5 for this. I like it. And everything you're going to be doing in Svelte is now going to be Svelte 5. So let's just use it. I will talk about while we're doing it, just like the last video. Use whatever framework you'd like. And just like that, it's installed instantly. So we can come in here and we can say checklist cd to checklist rep. Okay. I'm going to pop open my code. So I'm going to do code./ to open this in VS Code. Then I'm going to do npm install. Okay, we have our things installed. We can also do npm install --save and rep Replicache, like this. Replicache, Replicache, okay? Now this is a package, again, that allows you to do all of the syncing, and we'll talk about setting this up for success for the second part, where we actually bring in a full database and sync this offline to a server that actually will live in the same application that we're on. So you won't need a third-party server. So we're going to do npm install save Replicache. So this is great. Now we can do npm run dev. Okay, and we'll have our app available at localhost 5173, the classic port here. And you can see we have our welcome to Svelte kit. All right, I'm going to get rid of all of this stuff, and we're going to get going because I don't want to spend too much time on the stuff that doesn't matter. So we're going to do every single thing that we need to do in this application beyond maybe CSS. And in fact, I'll do the CSS at the end, so that way if you don't care about the CSS, you don't have to watch it. But the last one felt a little ugly when we finished, so I want to at least give you something to make this look a little nicer. So page.svelte here. Now I'm going to create a script with a lang of ts. This just means that we're using TypeScript. And the first thing I want to do is I want to create a type of to-dos, because this is going to kind of inform everything that we have going forward. So we're going to have a new type named to-do. It's going to have an ID. It's going to have a name, which is going to be a string. It's going to have a deleted, which is going to be an interesting thing we'll have to talk about. Not Boolean, thank you very much. We'll also have a created at, and this is going to be the type of a string, believe it or not, and then an updated at, and this is also going to be the type of a string. Now, the reason being is that when we store things in a Replicache, it's going to get stored as a string, so I might as well just accept that this date is going to be a string here. And I'm also going to have another value, which is completed, which is a Boolean. So what's up with deleted? Why do we need to delete it? Well, in Replicache land, when you're deleting things, it can all get a little tough. So if you're working at it at a basics and you're just getting used to Replicache, an easier strategy is actually to have a flag that is deleted that hides the record from our database queries, rather than actually deleting this thing. Now you could actually delete it. There's tons of documentation on how to do that, but if I want to show you one step at a time here, using a deleted flag is much more simple. So that's great. Next thing I want to do is create my state. So we're going to say let to-dos is equal to, and we're going to say $state, and it's going to be an empty array. Sorry, I need an equals there, and the type of this thing is going to be to-dos as an array, or to-do, I believe. So again, an array of to-dos. Next thing we'll want is our form state. So we're going to say let form state, and this is going to be equal to a state with a name that is empty. So in React land, this is just a use state, and you get the set state methods and the state itself. In Svelte, you just get $state. You can mutate the state directly or bind it. Again, React folks, you know how to work with state, so nothing crazy here. And in fact, this is the most complex the state will get in this our application, essentially because our Replicache is going to be doing so much for us. So now that we have our basic state, let's go ahead and create our HTML. We're going to have a form. The method for the form method is going to be equal post, and we're going to have an onSubmit on here. This is going to call a function onSubmit. So you can have an onSubmit event. Again, in React, you know how to do your on events. In Svelte, you can just do bracket onSubmit like this, and then create a function named onSubmit like so. And then now you can call this function onSubmit. Now, one of the things we'll want to do first off the bat is do an e.prevent default, because we don't want this form to actually reload the page. And this will be a just type event. We're not going to need to get too specific with this just yet. Okay, cool. So we have our form, we have our onSubmit. Let's go ahead and add, first thing we need a label, and this is going to be for name, and this will just say to do, like this. It could be name, it could be anything else you would like it to be, but then we're going to have a type of text for an input, a name of name, and an ID of name. And we're going to bind the value of this input to form state dot name. Now we're doing this because in Svelte you can bind values, and Vue you can also bind values. So if you're a Vue or Svelte user, use the bind. If you're a React user, you'll want to run your whole on-change thing that you have to do for inputs, or hell, use the form input library of your choice. Okay, so that's it. Let's go ahead and actually, I'm going to bump up the font size just a little bit, just make it nice and obvious here so you can all see. And then we're going to have a button type of submit, and then it's going to have an add. I like to put a little plus in here just for flavor. Okay, so we have this form. Next thing we'll want is our unordered list. Again, we're going to start with the HTML here. That way we don't have to worry about it when things get like really real. So, okay, we're going to do an each to-dos, and you could think about it just like this as its basic structure. Where each to-dos as to-do, we're going to put each one inside of a list item, and the to-do name will simply be like this. Now I'm going to do some things to prepare us for the future. I'm going to put the to-do name inside of a span. That's going to have to help with CSSing what we want to do. And the button, I'm going to have a button, and this is just going to be a button like so. And eventually this is going to have an SVG in it, but for now, let's go ahead and I'll save that for the end in the CSS part. But for now, let's just go ahead and use an emoji check mark for now. Okay, so we don't need to do too much more other than that with our HTML just to get this going. We're going to be augmenting it as we go, and honestly, we don't have our list items anyway, so that's a good start. Let's actually focus on the Replicache stuff now specifically. Again, this whole project is going to take place in, about 200 lines of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in one file, and it's going to give us a fully working application. Now, again, it's not going to sync offline because that's considerably more complex, but we'll get to that when we get to it. So the first thing I want to do is create the name of our storage, and this is going to be equivalent to the name in the database. Now, the first thing I want to do is create the name for our storage. In fact, if you look inside of our indexed DB here, actually this application won't have any just yet, but when we get going, the name is going to be what appears inside of the indexed DB here. So let's go ahead and create the name. We're going to say let name, and name is going to be equal to one of two things. We're going to check to see if we are in dev mode. And if we're in dev mode, this is going to say dev : to-dos, and then usually in Replicache land, you attach the user ID to this. Now, the user ID would have to come in from the user logging in and then syncing. We'll talk about all that later. For now, since this data is not moving off of our computer, it's fine to just have a hard-coded string here. For production, we'll want to say something like to-dos and then user ID once this moves into production, just so it doesn't have the dev tag in front of it. Now this dev that's underlined red, this can actually be imported with app.environment from SvelteKit. So in your application, whatever it may be, Next.js, I have no idea what your meta framework will be. It typically is a way of determining if you're in the development environment. That could even just be a simple access to an environment variable. But for us, import dev app environment. So if we're in development land, let's go ahead and name this dev to-dos user ID, otherwise user ID. Cool. So that's nice and easy. Let's go ahead and create our Replicache now. We're going to hit some bumps along the way, but we'll solve them. So let's go ahead and say let rep is equal to new Replicache. Okay. And I'm going to add import from Replicache like this. Again, you can import it first by hand if you'd like. The import is import Replicache from Replicache as a named import here. So that's it. Obviously, this is going to be angry. It does not like that. It has got no argument. So let's fix that. We're going to give it an object as an argument because it has a number of options here. Now, the first one is going to be name, which we have just given it. The next one is going to be the license key. I'll talk more about the license key in just a second. Right now, it's going to be a blank string. Next up is going to be mutators, okay? And mutators is going to be the methods in which we modify our data. Right now, I'm going to leave this completely empty because this is where some of the meat of our application will live. And now that we refresh this, you'll see that things are broken. What's broken about this? Now, something very fun just happened here. The application crashed out with an IndexedDB is not defined. If you want to take a second to guess why IndexedDB is not defined, it is not obvious, but it's something that you might have thought about. So you can take that time, maybe pause it if you want to think about it. You should be able to figure out the answer. It's nothing specific to Replicache itself, but it is specific to how we're storing local data. So I'm going to create a new file here to solve this, and this is page.ts. Now to do that in SvelteKit, we need to do export const ssr equals false, and that's from page.ts. Simply doing that is going to make our page only render client-side. In fact, if we head back to our application, we run it in Warp, it should be loading up fine. And the reason this is happening is because when we're working with client-side data, you need this stuff to run on the client. But if this template is attempting to load server side, then it's going to crash because IndexedDB is not available on the server side. Not only that, even if you had IndexedDB, you would have a separate database for the server and the client, and that's not what we're doing here, okay? So now our application is running, but we are getting a curious error. And this goes back to the license thing. It says Replicache license not valid, that you need a license key. And the way to get a license key is to do exactly what it says here, which is npx replicache get license. I'm going to pop this open in my terminal. I'm just going to make a new tab. And I'm going to say npx replicache get license. And what this is going to do, you give it your name. My company project is syntax tutorial local first. Okay. And the contact email is just going to be my email. Do you want, is your project commercial as defined by the terms? No, it's not commercial. Do you agree to the terms of service? Yes, I do. And just like that, I have a license key. Now, I'm not going to show you my license key, but I'll tell you what you have to do with it. And really quick, before we actually dive into adding that license key, I do want to just share with you that Replicache can be a paid product. Now, I don't know what the future of this is, but for the most part, you're not going to have to worry too much about this unless your application is one, bringing in money, and two, bringing in a decent amount of money. Because the only way that Replicache charges you is if your project has greater than 200,000 annual reoccurring revenue, or it has more than $500,000 worth of funding. So let's say you've received venture capital for a commercial project. You'll have to pay for Replicache. But for those of you who are just trying it, working on side projects, working on things that aren't even making very much money, your application's making you $1,000 a month, you don't have to pay for it. So that's why we have to work with the license key. Now, I understand open source software, people not wanting to pay for things, but I think the licensing approach here is a pretty good way to support the development of this project, but also it's pretty generous. I've never paid anything for Replicache. Okay, so let's go ahead and add this. I'm going to go ahead and in my project create a new .env, and a .env file is where we put our environment variables. Now this is going to be different based on which framework you're using, which meta framework, but I'm going to say vite rep license. And by prefixing vite in front of this, it makes it so this is public. Now this license key, yeah, it's one of these things that, we're working client side. This thing is going to be available client side no matter what. You can only hide it. But it makes sense to put it in your env so that way the license key just isn't sitting in your Git repo while, people can just take it. They might have to do a little bit more effort to even know your application's using this. Now, I'm not going to show you my license key, but I'll just paste it in here and you can imagine what that would look like. Now, from here, let's go ahead and utilize that license key. We're going to be doing so just by moving that license key to where we had our license. Now, there's a number of ways you can do that in any of your applications. Consult Next.js or whatever you're using, but we can say import.meta.env and then the one is vite _ rep _ license. Copilot, you're not being helpful because those are all wrong. Okay. So with that, let's actually head back to our application and see if we get rid of that error, which we do. You're going to see these couple of Svelte errors down here. And in fact, these are just warnings. I'm going to turn them off for now. It's Svelte 5's in beta. That's currently a bug. There's even a PR to fix it. No worries here, right? Okay, cool. So we have our application. We have our Replicache. Now we actually want to start doing something with it. So let's get going on these mutators. Now the mutators are where you mutate your data, and these things are interesting because they define what happens to the client-side data. So you really have to think about, we're modifying the client-side data, and then eventually we're going to send messages that show the patch of what changed, and we'll have pull messages as well, and we'll even have poke, so that way we can poke the client side to pull again, but all in due time because this stuff is a bit complex. So we're going to say create to do, and this is going to be an async function like this, and we're going to first create a key for this item. The key is the key value inside of our database. We're going to say const key is equal to, typically you'd say what the data type is, so it's a to-dos / and then we're going to say it's going to be the args dot id. Okay, what args you say? Well, the args are going to be passed into here. However, the first parameter here is the tx, frequently referred to as a tx inside of their documentation. This is, every time you see tx in this video, it means a transaction, okay? And the second one is going to be args. Now the args, believe it or not, is going to be a to-do, a singular to-do. So like this. That way we get the ID, right? Remember, we created that inside of our to-do type. This allows you to make sure that when we run this function, it's type safe. What about this tx, you say? What about that tx? This tx is going to be the type of write transaction. Like this, write transaction, we can import from Replicache. Write transaction, and this comes in automatically from Replicache. However, we're using this as a type. I don't know why VS Code didn't do this. We need to have a type write transaction, okay? Cool. We're moving. So this is our create to do. We're creating a to do with a key of the arg for the ID. So each one has an ID. Then we're going to await, and then we're going to await tx.set. If you try to use put here, I'll say it's deprecated, even though their docs do show put sometimes. But we're going to do tx.set. We're going to pass it in the key, and then we're going to pass it in the args, which is simply our to do. So that's how we add a to do to our cache. So before we get into the toggling of a to do, let's just go ahead and get this working where we can at least add and see to dos on the screen. So you'll remember that we did in fact create our to dos state right here, which is in our application a svelte state. As long as your framework of choice has state, this is how you would do this. Now I'm going to be doing this inside of an effect, and an effect in Svelte is the exact same as a use effect in React. You just don't have to specify the dependency array. So I'm going to say effect, and effect, just like React, takes a function. Okay? Now, just like React, when you return from an effect, you can return the destroy from here. Like let's say we build up something. Let's say we create a listener. If you return the destroy, when the file unmounts, it will destroy that listener, okay? So to do that, just like React, we return. And what we are returning is the rep.subscribe. Subscribe. And now, what's going on inside of subscribe? Inside of subscribe, we have a async function that is anonymous. It does not have a name, and this gives us access to a transaction. Again, everything inside of Replicache works with transactions. Now inside of this transaction, we need to access our to-do items. So we can say const to-do items is equal to, and this is going to be equal to, and let me even make my screen just a little bit more full size here so you can see it all. This is going to be equal to await tx.scan. Okay, you can see scan gets many values from a database. Thank you, overlay, for hiding the code but telling me at least what it does. So we're going to await tx scan, and we're going to look for every single item that has a prefix of to-dos. And I believe we said to-dos and not to-do. Yes, we did. Okay. Make sure that that is correct. If you don't have the prefix the same as the key for your item here, it's not going to find anything. And we're not going to stop there. We added a semicolon, but we're going to also do inside of this entries, and then we're going to take our entries and we're going to turn it into a to array. So this is essentially getting us all of the to-dos from our database, and it's going to turn them into an array like we'd be used to using. So this is already quite a bit, right? To-dos items. Now, one last thing here before we do any more is I'm going to console log out this to-dos items, and we're also going to add in a function here where it's just going to be items, an array, and we'll also console log items here. Okay, this is just so we have an understanding of what we're doing before we actually get into doing it. And I'll walk through exactly what's happening here as well. But before we do that, let's go ahead and work on our onSubmit function. That way we can actually have data to see if we're loading data correctly. So, I lied. I said this is going to be a simple event. This is going to be a submit event type, and it's going to do prevent default. From here, we're going to get to use our Replicache. We're going to say rep.mutate, and then we're going to get to use the name of our mutation. Now, what's great about this is that Replicache already knows what the mutations you've created are, so it has it here as a method for us. That way, you're not getting any spelling errors incorrectly. And this is going to take essentially an object of all of the things that we said it would have, including an ID. Now, creating an ID can be tough in this scenario if you plan to sync it to a third-party database. So your ID creation strategy could be with a UUID or something like that, and then you could have that ID in the database. If you already have items with IDs in the database, then this also gets a little iffy. You might even leave it out of the create process and have it only return from the server with an ID. But that is part of the complexity we're dealing with. For this very simple example, I'm just going to say new date, get time, and that's going to give us enough of an ID. Next thing we're going to have is a name, and this is going to be formState.name. Remember that we're modifying formState and giving it a name. This is still angry because we haven't completed everything. Deleted is equal to false. Created at is going to be equal to a new ISO string, and completed is also going to be false. So for once, Copilot actually got all of this stuff correctly. Actually, I believe it's Codium and not Copilot. So shout out to Codium, which is probably why it got right. Big fan of Codium, by the way. So, okay, created at new date ISO string, updated at new date ISO string, completed false. We now have no more TypeScript errors because this is what this is expecting. And here we want to clear out our form state, and this can be formState.name is equal to just an empty string, just updating that value. If we had a more complex form, this would be different. Okay? Okay, so not a whole lot's going on here just yet. We're making a to-do app, right? Nothing too crazy. But let's go ahead and add our to-dos. You can see some things are already console logging out. So we're going to say go to store and hit add. You'll notice that obviously nothing has appeared here, but inside of our to-dos items now is an array of two things. You might expect one thing, but it is in fact two things. Also, we're getting some errors inside of here. We're not going to worry about those just yet because, of course, we have a fix for that. So to-dos items is an array, and it looks like this. Now, when we turned our to-dos items into an array and got the entries to an array, you might have expected it to look like the actual data. But in fact, it looks like this, where we have the key as one value and then the actual to-do as the second value in the array. In fact, if we were to add another one, which is record tutorial, if we scroll down here, you're going to see we have two arrays that each have two items, each with the key and then the actual value. So that means, which is one of the reasons why we logged this out in the first place, is that we need to adjust this. And when we return from here, we're going to return to-dos items dot map, and then we're going to get the individual item and it's going to be returning the second option in this array. Now you could always say item 1 here to get the first index out of here. Another thing you could do is destructure this into an array. So you could say we're underscores often used for things that you're not using, and then colon values, and then we could just simply return values. This is the way that I like to do it personally. You know, whatever, do it the way you want to do it. They do the same thing. Now, since we're returning to-dos items here, the value that was previously undefined whenever we ran this is now going to be actually equal to an array of just the objects of the two things we want, which means that all we have to do here in this return, because what this is doing is it's grabbing the data from the transaction and sending it along, and this is where we process or decide what we do with the data. And in our case, we're just going to set to-dos is equal to items, like this. Now you'll see we get a TypeScript here because it's arguing that read-only JSON value is not assignable to the type of to-do. You could say that this is a to-do like this, but then again, we now have this error where it's not returning the right thing. So of course, eventually we have to get into casting here, where you could say as to do, and that should make TypeScript happy, where we now have everything as it is a to do. So with that out of the way, if we head back to our application, guess what we see? It's working. This is fantastic, right? This is exactly what we wanted this to do. Now, the next things we need to talk about are what we want to do when we are actually modifying the store, because we're able to now add things to here, and you'll see what was happening because we actually work with subscriptions. But let's say we have a to-do, which is just vacuum. Picked a word I know how to spell. Vacuum. Great. Thank you for that. And I hit add, it adds it automatically. Not only that, I refresh, it's storing it to our local host. Now, if we nuke the local database, this data will be gone, but for all intents and purposes, this is saving to our database. This is fantastic. Next thing we want to do is write our toggle mutation, so that way we can actually complete a to-do. So let's head back up to our mutators, and we're going to say toggle to-do. And toggle to do is once again going to be the very similar structure. And in fact, we're kind of taking the same things. We're taking the to-dos as an argument here and the right transaction as the transaction. Let me pull this open here full screen. Because what we're going to do is say const key, and once again, that way we update the correct one. We're going to make sure that the key is the exact same as what the key was before. And then we're just going to, once again, await txset key args. Now, this is basically just an update function, right? You could think of this as, hey, we're updating the thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be named toggle to do because it's just updating it. But I think this is more explicit this way. Of course, in your own applications, you can choose to do what you'd like. Let's go ahead and write our toggle function here. Function, and this is going to be toggle. Toggle is going to take a to-do, which is the type of to-do, and this is going to rep.mutate.toggle to-do, thank you for that, and we're going to spread out to-do, and then for completed, we're going to set it to the opposite of what it currently is. Toggle is just going to be called as an on-click event on our button, so let's come in here to our button, and we can say on click equals, and this is going to be a function that toggles the specific to do, since this is happening inside of an array. So that will toggle our to-dos. That's really great. Next thing I want to do here is add some very quick ways so that we actually know that they're being toggled when we toggle them. For instance, if we go ahead onto the list item itself, we could add a class of completed is equal to do complete. This syntax in Svelte is simply just saying set a class of completed if this value is true. So if it's completed, give it the class of completed. So I know I'm not going to write much CSS in here, but let's at least do this, where we'll say completed, and we'll cover CSS at the end of the day. We'll say opacity, and we'll say 0.5. So if something is completed, just make it slightly transparent. That way we can tell that it's been that way. Okay, so let's see this in action now. If we click one of these, hopefully what happens is it goes transparent, and you can see that it has. Now, this all seems fairly complex and maybe overly done, but when you realize what's going on behind the scenes is that it's not just saving data to an object in an IndexedDB, and it's taking in all of the information about who is doing what and how they're doing it. And even just to illustrate this, let me show you this. I have these side by side here, and this is something that comes out of the box. When I click record tutorial here, you can see in the other window it's immediately going, and this is because we're subscribing to that data in the local database. Now granted, this is two tabs on the same machine in the same browser, and that's why this is working. Obviously, if you did it in two different browsers, it might not work the same because the data isn't being stored, right? But that's where the whole database part of things comes in. So that's really awesome. And if we wanted to take this thing offline, we just need to add a service worker. Now, if you wanted to end the tutorial here and mess around with Replicache, now is a great time to do that. For the remainder of this tutorial, we're going to be working on styling. We're going to be working on just small little UI tweaks and making it a little bit more interesting. So that way, when we finish, we get this instead of this, right? But again, you now have enough to get Replicache basically working offline. Now, if you're wondering why we haven't synced to a server, I'm going to just show you a preview of how that might look here. In fact, this is an application that I'm working on. I'll bump up the font size. And you can see, instead of just having mutators, I have a pull and push URL. This is where it pulls and pushes data from. And it also has like an on syncing in here. But even let's take a look at our mutators. Our mutators are way more intense. Actually, they're up here. Where are they at? Set user, update. Yeah, these are our mutators, right? And at the end of the day, it's still just manipulating the local data, but we have a lot more of them. And if you feel like this isn't that complex, let me just show you really quick the push and pull. So I'm going to show you really quick a push. And inside of a push, it's, you can see like a 14-step, 15-step process where what we're doing is, let's go all the way to the top. This thing is intense. So the first thing we're doing is checking to make sure the user is able to do what it's doing. Then it's getting a list of all of the transactions. Then it's going to be getting what's called a client group, which we're not going to talk about. If the client doesn't exist, insert it. Then we're going to make sure that the user is the correct user to access that information. Then we're going to take a look at every single mutation in this message. And we're going to get a client ID with the client ID from that mutation. If the client doesn't exist, make it. Again, check authorization. Make sure that user has access to that client. We're going to set the next version, so that way it updates a version each time you push or pull. We create a server space, which is like, you could think of a space where the data lives on the server. Maybe multiple people are writing to that space. This example, just one person is. Again, we're grabbing the next version. We're checking to make sure the versions are correct. We're saying, hey, if the next one is equal to the current one, do this, do that, whatever. You know, we're either rolling back data, we're skipping the mutation at all, check for an error. Otherwise, if all of that is true, let's go ahead and update the server to the next version. Let's update the client to the next version. Then let's run a emitter to say that, hey, a pull is required, and then we're going to say push success equals true. Now you might be wondering in all of this, where's even the database mutations going? Well, there's a function I called process mutations, where we write a big old switch statement, and this is where we actually get into our DB queries. So needless to say, there's a whole lot there, which is why we can't do it in this video. So if that's all you want to do, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. If those of you would like to stick around and make this thing look and feel a little bit nicer, maybe learn some stuff about Svelte as we go, stick around because we'll be doing that. In fact, I'll even show you some of my favorite resources to build this stuff nicely. Okay, so we have all this. One thing I want to do is add that neat little animation. You'll remember in this version when I click something, or when let's click a different one. You can see it puts the ones that are complete at the top, and the ones that are complete at the bottom, the ones that are yet to be complete at the top. Okay, and it does that by the order in which they're created. So how do we implement something like this? Well, one thing that we can do to get the animation of them swapping around is we're going to use an animate flip from Svelte. This gives you easy flip animations, animate : flip. And I'm going to set the duration of that to be 200 milliseconds because the actual duration that it comes with is way, way, way too slow. Okay, animate flip like that. Duration 200. Now this is getting angry because we don't have a key here. If you need a key, which we do, you can set a key like this. In React, it's just key. Again, you don't have this animate flip, but there's tons of animation libraries for React. And so that's a good one right here. That will get us animating. Now, what about actually sorting them correctly? Well, each time this data comes in from our database, we'll want to sort it. So we can sort it a few ways, and we'll also want to potentially filter it as well. So right here, when we had this values as map as to do, we'll also want to filter to make sure that a to-do is not deleted. So to-do.deleted doesn't exist. So again, we're not doing a deletion in this video, but this hides the deletion ones if we want to delete items. Again, we had that deleted flag. Next, we have our to-dos equals items, but before we do that, let's do to-dos equal items, and we're going to sort it. We're going to sort it twice. The first time we're going to sort it is going to be if it's been completed or not, then also created at. So actually, let's first do A, comma B. And if you don't know much about JavaScript sorting, I don't love the syntax ever. And so it's not something I'm going to spend too much time on, but you can copy and paste this. We're going to do A, if created at is greater than B created at, then we're going to want to what? Return 1. So if created at is higher than B, then it goes up in the stack. And then we're going to do a nested ternary because, you know, who doesn't love those? This is like the only time I use them. We're going to say, oh, I wrote create at, not created at. Oh no, TypeScript just saved me. I'm going to keep it as create app at. I don't like that. I like created at. But actually, yeah, let's fix that because I don't like create at. Thank you, TypeScript. This is why we use TypeScript, folks. If you notice that, because we did have updated at, then you are a champion. Now, unfortunately, that means that some things will break here. Don't worry, we can always create new to-dos and new items here, especially when we're working in development. We can say, all right, well, if A is not greater than, if A is less than B, then we're going to want to check to see if B is greater than A created at. If B is greater than A, then move A down 1, otherwise keep it where it's at. Okay, so that's sort. We're going to do the exact same thing now to sort whether it's been completed. So we're going to say sort, and we're going to say sort once again, A comma B. Here's an array, and we're going to say inside of here, if A dot completed is equal to B dot completed, then leave them where they are. Otherwise, A dot completed, which is in itself a Boolean, right? If it's true or false. If A is completed, then we want A, then we want it to be returned 1. Okay, super cool. That should give us sorting. So now we can see that if ever we check one of these, you can see nothing quite happens. But let's say I say did homework. Okay, you can see it's now added it to the list. We can now check and uncheck to our heart's content, and you can see that when something becomes checked, it automatically goes to there in the list. I actually think I did some of this logic potentially wrong here. I think I swapped these greater thans, and in fact I even swapped it when I was talking about it. Remember when I said that I'm not good at sorting? I'm sorry, created at is less than B, then return 1. Okay, so when I said A, B, swap them in your head. Sorry about that, folks. Again, sort is not my favorite. Okay, there, that should do it. I swapped this one and I swapped this one, and that's it. Now again, when we create a new item, dance, and actually it's still not working because if you can guess, I goofed up something even here. I'm still doing created at. Sorry folks. Let's go ahead. We have everything in place now. The sorting's all correct. Our information's now correct. This is how it works. And if you ever need to nuke out your database, you come into application, you find your database, you click delete database, you click OK, you refresh, and they're all gone. Again, we're working in what is, you know, an environment where you're prone to make mistakes here. And I just noticed I did homework. I'm not on my language right now, but now if we check any of these, it goes to the bottom. checks them, does everything correct. We say do dance. Now it puts it at the top. We check it. It should be the first one that is not that is complete. Cool. Good step. Moving along. Let's go ahead and add an icon in here. So instead of this emoji check, I like this checkbox. I got this checkbox from an app called Nucleo. This is an app I really like for icons. You can find it here, nucleoapp.com. Just download it, get some icons. Again, I have an icon here and I've tweaked it just a bit. This code is going to be open source, so if you just want to copy directly from mine, that's cool too. I'm just going to paste this SVG inline. I know that that's a kind of a topic on its own. I'm going to paste this SVG inline. Some of the most important things is that I'm using some CSS variables here that we haven't quite added yet, but we will. And in fact, let's get to that aspect of things. Let's go ahead and make our CSS file, or at least our root CSS file. Inside of our routes, we can say app.css. In this file, we can import app.css. Let's go ahead and write that app.css. Now this CSS is going to be coming from a couple of different places. The first thing I want to do is create a root. In fact, this is me writing CSS from scratch. How would I approach this? Well, the first thing I need is a type scale, and I come into my handy dandy type scale app, which is available to you at fluid-type.tolin.ski. I'll have a link in the show notes, and I can select the way I want this type to look. I like a major third. I'm going to add an XXS here, and I'm going to even add one bigger one just for funs. I'm going to go ahead and copy all of this, and these are going to be my type scale. So that way I can use these variables anywhere in my application, which is nice. I typically always get this from my fluid type. This in itself is a whole interesting topic. Next thing I want to do is grab some variables. We're going to say hyphen black, and black is just going to be equal to 101010, just slight off black. I like hard on black, but same thing with white, EEE. Okay, 3 E's. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to have a BG. And BG is going to use an interesting function in CSS. This is going to be light-dark. So if we're in light mode, we want to use the background as white. If we're in dark mode, we want to use the background as black. Okay, so this is the background. And likewise, the foreground is going to be the exact opposite. We want the foreground to be black in light mode and light in dark mode. To get this to work, we do need something, and we can just throw it down here out of the way. Color-scheme is going to be equal to light first and then dark. Again, this allows us to use our system colors automatically without having to do any extra work. And then we have this basic functionality right here. This is pretty amazing because it gets us a whole lot. The next thing I want to do is add some class to the body, or some styles to the body. We could say font-size var-base, or fs-base. We can have a really tiny little reset of margin 0 auto. We can have a padding of 20 pixels. I don't usually add a padding to the body, but this example is so simple, no biggie. And then the background is going to be equal to var-bg, and the color is going to be equal to var-fg for foreground. And then font-family is just going to be a system-UI. You could have a whole stack for this if you wanted, but system UI works just fine. Okay, save this, bingo bango. Let's head back to our application. It should be looking quite a bit more like the example. In fact, let me even close this console. Looking quite a bit more like the example here. Cool, this is working, right? It's definitely working. We got the type scale, we have all that stuff. Let's head into our page.svelte and handle the rest of the CSS there, because this is going to scope the CSS specifically to this file. In fact, I'm going to come all the way down here. I'm going to add a label and give this a display block, because I like my labels to be display block like that. And I did, of course, the classic misspelling of label. I'm going to do, for each list item, we're going to do a display flex. We're going to do a line item center, get things nice and centered. We're going to do a gap of 1 rem and a font size of var --FSL. So we're gonna go large with this, okay? And actually for the UL, we need the classic list style none. Not letter spacing, normal. Okay, and then the classic margin 0, padding 0. Okay, cool. Actually, even in here on our form, we're going to give this a margin bottom 1 rem just to give it some space, nice and easy. But none of this stuff is the fun stuff. Honestly, it's starting to look good, but it's not quite there yet, right? So now it's time to get to the fun stuff where we're modifying the way it looks when it's completed. I'm just going to go all the way to the bottom here where we had this initial completed. I'm actually even going to bump this down to 0.3. I like that better. I'm going to give this a transition of 0.2 seconds. We're going to do the just classic ease. I know there are better easing curves than this. And then we're going to say at hover, we're going to give this an opacity of 1 no matter what. I spelled transition wrong, of course. Thank you for that. And so now, whenever these are complete, we hover over them. It makes it so they are non-transparent, like this. Beauty. Next thing we're going to say is the span inside of here is going to have a position relative, okay? Because we're going to want to say the after of the span, we're going to want to give it some stuff. It's going to have a content of empty. It's going to have a position of absolute, PSA. It's going to have a display block. It's going to have a height of 6 pixels. It's going to have a BG of, we'll just give it something arbitrary. I don't like to do non-CSS variables, but this is fine. It's going to give a top of 50%, and it's going to give a left of 0%, and a width of 100%. That should be enough. We'll see in just 1 second if that was enough. Okay, and what this is doing is this is creating the crossed out line. So you can see with that bit of CSS with an after, we now have this crossed out line that looks really nice. So we're almost there. We have the nice little check going through. We have the opacity. This is all zooming around here. This is really sick. I think basically the last thing we need to do here is get our button in check. And the button, I don't know if I gave it a class, but I will need to give it a class. Let's go all the way up here, give it a class of, we'll call it check, not a class of button. No, thank you. And then down here, check. Check will be getting some styles, padding, 0. It's going to be getting a BG of transparent. Not going to spell that wrong. It's going to get a border of none. It's going to get a display of flex. And this is just to get everything vertical, you know, aligning things vertically. It's the joke. But if you display flex something and then align items center, it just works. We can save this, and you could see just about instantly we're pretty good. One more thing is that you could also, you know, fix this by giving the UL display of flex, but you could also fix this with a neat little trick where you could say ampersand plus LI, and this is going to have a margin top of 1 rem. Now we give them a bit more spaced out. In fact, we could even go like 0.5 rems. I use rems for spacing because it's nice and easy to keep everything relative here. Cool. Actually, we want to make this look a little bit nicer too, and you could choose to style this stuff any way that you'd like. But let's go ahead and do that up top inside of my form here where I had this. I'm going to say both the input, comma, and the button are going to get some styles. They're going to say, let's say font size of var FSL. We want to go big with these just because it's a big, bold app, right? BG of transparent for both of these. We're going to have a border of none. We're going to have, and that's weird that it would suggest outline of none. Don't put outline of none on your inputs. We need, if you do keyboard access, you need that outline. So don't do that in a bad AI, okay? So we'll do transition 0.2 seconds ease, and this is just going to be background. I almost never write the word background, so forgive me for spelling that wrong. And then we're going to say on hover. just give it a nice little background. Now let me show you another little CSS trick here for this background status. In fact, I'm going to go back into my app.css and back up here for my variables where we have the FG or the BG. Now this is a neat little trick that I do where it gives you a shade or a tint depending on which color mode you're in. But you don't have to even use the light dark function for this. So let me show you exactly how I manage that. And for those of you who didn't go to art school, a tint makes something whiter and a shade makes something darker. So if it's in dark mode, we want the hover state to be darker. If it's in dark mode, we want the hover state to be lighter. So this is tint or shade. And this is going to be automatic. We're going to do a color-mix, which color mix is available to just about 90% of users worldwide. So I feel comfortable using this function. And we're going to say in OKLab, comma, var, --FG, and we're going to mix that with transparent 95%. Did I write transparent correctly? Man, my spelling has been all over the place today. Okay. This seems like it's fine. We'll see if in a second it worked. So this is my tint or shade. Basically, we're mixing the foreground, which is actually toggled here, and we're going to mix it with transparent 95%. So no matter what we do, it's going to be a little bit transparent on top of here, giving us a shade or a tint whenever it's appropriate. And we can say var background is equal to tint or shade. Cool. So now if we hover over the input, you can see, yes, we do get a nice little like that. Again, this is just going to be, this is going to be at your own choice. You can make this look at as however you'd like. I'm going to say border, bottom, and it's going to be 1 pix, solid, FG. In fact, check this out. I'm going 0.5 pixels. We're going to make it nice and small. Now we have this right here. Now, those of you with a keen eye will notice that my autocomplete actually goofed up. I wrote font style right here. So if we change this to font size, now we have our nice big stuff now. And for the most part, this stuff will get kind of fluid. Now, the interface doesn't necessarily hold up. If you go to mobile, you'll want to do some more work there. But I think this is a great start to what we had. And it's going to be a nice basis for adding in the server-side syncing that we had talked about. All right, so 2 more things before we're done here. If you want to keep following along, we're going to be adding our service worker to get this working offline. And also I want to show you just a little bit really quick here about that light and dark mode thing that we did. So when we went to, let's do our app.css, when we did our color scheme light dark, and then we used light dark here, what this allows us to do is, like I said, it uses the system color for light dark. And if we head into our Chrome DevTools, click these 3 dots, we go to more tools, we look at rendering. If we scroll all the way down here, right here, prefers color scheme, if we say light, you can see the application actually responds. It's pretty neat how this thing works. And this actually revealed an error that I made in the CSS. I nested check inside of completed. We want these properties to apply to check no matter what. So it's really good that that actually did that for us, because it gave us a way that we could see what our application will look like. It really unlocked a bug that we had. So again, if we change prefers color scheme, light or dark, this application looks great, flip-flops, all that stuff. Okay, lastly, we're going to be using our service worker. Now, in the last version, I showed you a nice and easy service worker that you can grab directly from SvelteKit's own documentation. However, again, any application that you're working on will most likely have its own means of getting a basic service worker up and running. So don't just copy and paste this one from the Svelte docs into your application if you're not using a SvelteKit site. But there's even a Vite PWA package, which I found to be a little overwhelming myself, but there's tons of ways you can get a service worker for what you're working on. So to utilize this service worker, I'm going to head into my source. I'm going to create a new file, service-worker. We'll do .js since this is actual JavaScript, and paste this in here. Yeah, there's going to be some TypeScript errors, but I'm going to ignore those. Okay, now we have a service worker, which means that if we head back to our application, let's go ahead and X out all of these windows upon windows upon windows. We go to the application tab, which is something that you're in a whole lot in these days. Where we refresh here, we'll be able to see actually really quickly, we'll see that a service worker is here. But since I use a lot of service workers in my local stuff, let's go ahead and unregister this one. I'm going to click unregister, and now it's gone. Now there's a new one here, but I can most likely be assured that this new one is the one I actually want. In fact, we can check our network tab. We can see this, and you can see that it is being loaded from a service worker, which means that if we do offline mode in our application and refresh, not only does the app still work, but we can still use it. We can still add new to-dos. And it's just going to be nice. This thing works no matter what. So this is offline software, this is local first software, and this is the bones of something that could be much bigger. Now obviously I know a lot of people want to get into the server syncing stuff, and we got a taste of it here. But in the next video, what we're going to be doing is actually setting up a database. We're going to be using Postgres. You're going to set up an ORM. We're going to be using Drizzle. We're going to write our push and pull. We're going to be learning all about the transactions that happen, the mutations that happen on the server, push and pull. And then from there, we'll get into more advanced techniques. We'll even talk about the backend strategies section of the Replicache page, because let me tell you, there's a lot of different things you can do with Replicache. So as always, this is Scott. I hope you really enjoyed this one. The code is going to be available to you on GitHub. Check it out. Let me know what you think. If you make a React, a Vue, or web, just literally anything version of this, let me know. Share it. I'll give you a tweet, whatever. I'll check it out. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I hope you have fun building your local first software.